Vision. It's our window to the world. Our vision system constructs a mental representation of our world. It helps us to successfully navigate our surroundings and interact with our environment. In this presentation, I will provide a basic overview of the anatomy and function of the visual system, as well as color and depth perception. Here is an illustration of the various parts of the eye. As you can see in the front of the eye, you have the cornea, pupil, iris, and lens. And towards the back is the retina, the fovea, and the optic nerve. The eye is the primary sensory organ which is involved in vision. The components of the eye will now be listed in detail. The cornea is the transparent dome-shaped outer layer of the eye which helps to focus incoming light. The pupil is the adjustable opening in the center of the iris that controls the amount of light entering the eye. The lens is a transparent structure that focuses light rays onto the retina, adjusting its shape for near or distant vision. The iris is the colored part of the eye that controls the size of the pupil, regulating light intake. The fovea is a small depression in the retina that provides the clearest vision by concentrating cones for sharp central vision. The retina is the light-sensitive layer at the back of the eye where light is converted into electrical signals sent to the brain. The optic nerve transmits visual information from the retina to the brain for processing. This is credit for the Wikipedia article on the human eye, which will be referenced at the end. Alright, moving on to functions. Light waves pass across the cornea and into the eye via the pupil. The pupil can expand to allow more light into the eye using muscles connected to the iris. It can also contract to allow less light. Light crosses the lens after leaving the pupil. Muscles attached to the lens can change its shape to focus on near or far objects. In normal-sighted people, the lens focuses images perfectly on a small indent called the fovea located in the back of the eye. The fovea is a part of the retina. The retina is the light-sensitive lining of the eye. Inside the fovea are densely packed and specialized cells which are known as cones. These are photoreceptors, meaning they're receptive to light. A specialized type of photoreceptor, the cone, works best in bright light. It's extremely sensitive to acute detail and provides excellent spatial resolution. It is directly involved in color perception. Moving on, the other type of photoreceptor in the eye are rods. They are effective in low light. However, they lack the spatial resolution and color function of cones. But they allow our vision to work in dimly lit conditions. They are also involved in our perception of movement in our peripheral vision. However, if rods do not transform light into nerve impulses properly, this causes difficulty seeing in low light, which is a condition known as night blindness. An example of how the rods work in our own real life is if you've ever been out on a moonlight night, it will appear that everything is in grayscale. However, it's not actually black and white. Moonlight is just reflected sunlight, and therefore it has the same spectrum. However, because of the low light conditions, our rods are being used, and therefore we do not perceive color and only intensity. Here is an illustration of both the location of the rods in the retina as well as the rods and cones, rods being blue and cones being green, and the relationship to the ganglion cells and optic nerves and how light comes in. Rods and cones are connected via interneurons to retinal ganglion cells. Axons from the retinal ganglion cells come together and leave out the back of the eye, forming what's known as the optic nerve. The optic nerve carries visual information to the brain from the retina. At a point called the optic chiasma, the optic nerves from each eye merge in an X-shaped structure directly below the cerebral cortex. At the optic chiasma, information from the right visual field goes to the left side of the brain, and information from the left visual field goes to the right side. This illustration shows the optic chiasma at the front of the brain, the pathways to the occipital lobe at the back, where vision is processed. And so you can see clearly here how they cross over and how left goes to right and right to left. Once visual information enters the brain, it is then sent via numerous structures to the occipital lobe, which is in the back of the brain, for processing. Visual information can be processed in parallel pathways. These pathways can be divided into the what pathway and the where/how pathway. The what pathway is responsible for object recognition and identification. The where/how pathway is responsible for the location in space and possible interactions with a visual stimulus. One example of this is if you were to see a bee flying towards you in a distance, and as the bee gets closer, the what pathway would identify that it's actually a hornet once it comes into view, whereas the where/how pathway can identify that it's flying towards your arm and then to make the decision to move out of the way or swat at it. Blind spots are a small point in our visual field where when even light from a small object focuses on that spot, we can't see it. We are not consciously aware of our blind spots for two reasons. Since each eye gets a different view, the blind spots do not overlap, and our visual system fills in the blind spot so that even though we don't receive information, we are not aware that it is missing. Color and depth perception. Starting with color vision. So individuals with normal sights have three different types of cones, and each of these cones is most sensitive to a different wavelength of light. In the trichromatic theory of color vision, it states that all colors can be produced by a combination of red, green, and blue, otherwise known as RGB. Each of the three cones is sensitive to one of the colors, specifically. On the other hand, the opponent process theory is a competing theory which states that color is coded in opponent pairs, such as black-white, yellow-blue, and green-red. The idea is that some cells in the visual system are excited by one color and inhibited by the other in the opponent pair. A cell excited by yellow wavelengths would be inhibited by blue wavelength light, and vice versa. This is a figure illustrating the peaks in sensitivity of red, green, and blue wavelengths. So an afterimage. An afterimage is when a visual sensation remains after the removal of the stimulus that caused it. One example of this is the spot of light after staring at a bright light source and then looking away. On the other hand, if color is involved, then color pairings identified by the opponent process theory lead to a negative afterimage. One example of this is when looking at a bright colored object and looking away, you can suddenly see a different opposite color. And it illustrates the interaction between the trichromatic and opponent process theories. So these two theories, the trichromatic theory of color, vision, and opponent process theory, are not mutually exclusive. Research has indicated that they actually apply to different nervous system levels. And as such, when visual processing happens in the retina, for example, trichromatic theory applies since the cones respond to the red, blue, and green light. However, once past the retina, the way the cells respond is consistent with the opponent process theory. Depth perception is the ability to perceive spatial relationships in three-dimensional space. This allows us to describe things as being in front of, behind, above, below, or to the side of other objects. Since our world is 3D, it does make sense that the way we perceive things has three-dimensional properties. Many different visual cues are used to establish our perception of depth. Some of these are referred to as binocular cues, meaning that they rely on both eyes. An example of a binocular cue is binocular disparity, or the different view of the world that each eye sees. This is also known as parallax and can be demonstrated by extending your arm fully and putting a finger up. If you close one eye or the other, the position of the finger seems to shift. This happens because of the different position of each eye. The image below illustrates how depth perception is achieved through convergence, where the eyes turn inward to focus on close objects, as well as accommodation, which is where the lens adjusts to maintain clarity for both near and distant objects. Although we use binocular cues to experience depth in our 3D world, our brains can also perceive depth in 2D. When we do this, we are relying on what is called monocular cues, or cues that require only one eye. It's a common misconception that we cannot perceive depth with only one eye. In fact, there are more monocular cues than there are binocular cues. One example of a monocular cue is known as linear perspective. Linear perspective refers to the fact that we perceive depth when looking at two parallel lines which seem to converge in an image. Other examples of monocular cues include interposition, the partial overlap of objects, and closeness of images to the horizon. Here is a photograph which illustrates the monocular cue of linear perspective. As you can see, the two lines on either side of the road seem to converge at the end of the photo, giving the illusion of distance and showing in our eyes that the road is going to the distance. Vision and psychology. Vision disorders have a significant effect on the well-being of individuals and their mental health. Psychological effects of vision loss. One major implication of vision on psychology is the psychological impact of vision loss, including depression and anxiety. Furthermore, a role of perception, and perception plays a crucial role in how individuals interpret visual stimuli, which affect how they interact with and perceive the world around them. Our visual acuity and perception are crucial for navigating social environments and maintaining our quality of life. Therapeutic approaches such as cognitive behavioral therapy can help improve the mental health outcomes for individuals with vision impairments. Further, a therapy called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, is a vision-centered therapy which can be used to treat trauma and PTSD. EMDR involves client recall of distressing events while receiving bilateral sensory input in the form of guided eye movements, helping to reprocess traumatic events. In conclusion, our visual system is essential for navigating and interacting with the world around us. The eye has key components which, like the cornea, lens, and retina, which work together to process visual information. And our color perception has the trichromatic and opponent process theories help to explain how we perceive color through specialized photoreceptors called cones and rods. And in depth perception, we utilize both binocular and monocular cues to perceive depth, allowing us to interpret spatial relationships in a three-dimensional world. Finally, understanding how vision works enhances our appreciation of its complexity and importance in daily life. Thank you for your time and listening to this presentation. Listed here are the references used in this presentation.